The church bell tolled, a hollow clang that echoed through Maplewood's quiet streets. But to Ellie Harper, sounded like a war cry. She stood in the town square, her white dress catching the late September breeze, her heart pounding as if it might break free. Today was her wedding day, but someone had spat the word funeral in her face, and it burned deeper than she'd ever admit. Ellie was 28, a carpenter with calloused hands and a stubborn streak. Raised in this small Virginia town where everyone knew your business before you did. She'd always been the odd one out, too tall, too quiet, too uninterested in the boys who swaggered through high school. But then came Sarah, 27, a librarian with a laugh like summer rain and eyes that saw right through Ellie's walls. They'd met 2 years ago at the town's only bookstore, when Ellie's order for a woodworking manual got mixed up with Sarah's request for a Sappho poetry collection. One awkward laugh, one shared coffee, and suddenly Ellie's world had color. Now, as she stood waiting for Sarah outside the courthouse because no church in Maplewood would host their wedding, Ellie felt the weight of every stare. The town wasn't ready for this. Hell, half the time, Ellie wasn't sure she was either. But Sarah's hand in hers, steady and warm, had a way of silencing doubt. They were making history today, the first same-sex couple to marry in Maplewood since the law changed. But history, Ellie was learning, came with a cost. The courthouse steps were crowded, not with supporters but with whispers. Old Mrs. Callahan, who ran the bakery, stood with her arms crossed, muttering to anyone who'd listen. "It's unnatural," she said, loud enough for Ellie to hear. "A funeral for decency." Ellie's jaw tightened, but she didn't turn. She'd heard worse slurs scrawled on her truck, anonymous letters stuffed in her mailbox. But this was her day, hers and Sarah's, and no one would steal it. Sarah appeared then, stepping out of a borrowed sedan, her blonde hair catching the fading sunlight. She wore a tailored blazer over landscape jeans, her usual defiance of small-town expectations. Her smile was a lighthouse, guiding Ellie through the storm of judgment. "You ready, Harper?" Sarah asked, her voice soft but steady, like she could hold the world together with a word. "Born ready," Ellie lied, her throat tight. They clasped hands, fingers interlocking like puzzle pieces, and walked up the steps together. The crowd parted, some faces curious, others cold. Ellie's best friend, Jake, a burly mechanic with a heart bigger than his wrench collection, stood by the entrance, grinning. "You two look like trouble," he teased, but his eyes were wet. Inside, the courthouse smelled of old wood and bureaucracy. The justice of the peace, a gray-haired woman named Judge Marilyn, had kind eyes but a no-nonsense demeanor. "You sure about this?" she asked, not unkindly, as she adjusted her glasses. "This town's not exactly rolling out the red carpet." "We're sure," Sarah said, her voice cutting through the room like a blade. Ellie squeezed her hand, grateful for her fire. The ceremony was quick, vows exchanged. Rings slipped on, a kiss that felt like a rebellion. Ellie's ring was simple silver, engraved with a tiny oak leaf. Sarah's was gold, a nod to her love for old books. When Judge Marilyn pronounced them married, Jake whooped, and a few strangers clapped. But outside, the whispers waited. They stepped back into the sunlight as wives, but the air felt heavier now. A man in a flannel shirt, Ellie recognized him as Tom. A regular at the hardware store, leaned against a lamppost, smirking. "Nice funeral," he called, loud enough for the crowd to hear. Laughter rippled, sharp and cruel. Sarah stiffened, but Ellie's blood boiled. She took a step forward, fists clenched, but Sarah's hand on her arm stopped her. "Don't," Sarah whispered. "They want to fight. Don't give it to them." Ellie wanted to scream, to tear the smirk off Tom's face, but Sarah's eyes held her steady. They walked past, heads high, toward the park where Jake had set up a small reception. It was just a few tables, some string lights, and a playlist Sarah had spent weeks curating. But to Ellie, it was perfect until the first rock sailed through the air. It landed near the punch bowl, small but deliberate. Ellie spun around, scanning the crowd for the culprit. A group of teenagers stood at the park's edge, snickering. One of them, a kid with a buzz cut and a Letterman jacket, shouted, "Go back to the city, freaks." Another rock followed, grazing Jake's shoulder as he tried to shield the food. "Enough!" Ellie roared, her voice raw. She stormed toward the kids, but Sarah grabbed her, pulling her back. "Ellie, stop. They're kids. They're just parroting what they've heard. They're ruining our day." Ellie's voice cracked, tears burning her eyes. She'd built her life here, fixed their roofs, carved their furniture, and now they were throwing rocks at her happiness. Sarah cupped Ellie's face, forcing her to meet her gaze. "They don't get to ruin this. We do. We choose what this day means." Her voice was fierce, her eyes blazing. Ellie nodded, swallowing hard, and let Sarah lead her back to the reception. Jake chased the kids off, his bulk enough to scatter them. The rest of the evening was too quiet. Friends stayed, danced, toasted, but the weight of the town's judgment hung over them. As night fell, Ellie and Sarah sat on a bench under an oak tree, the same one where they'd had their first date. Sarah traced the new ring on Ellie's finger. "We did it," she whispered. "We're married." "Yeah," Ellie said, her voice thick. "But why does it feel like we're fighting a war?" Sarah leaned her head on Ellie's shoulder. "Because we are. But we're winning." They sat in silence, the string lights flickering above. Ellie wanted to believe Sarah, but Tom's word funeral echoed in her mind. She wondered how many more battles they'd have to fight to call this town home. Tomorrow, they'd face the whispers again. But tonight, they had each other, and that was enough. The morning after the wedding, Ellie woke to the smell of coffee and the sight of Sarah reading at their kitchen table, her hair a golden mess in the sunlight. For a moment, everything felt right until Ellie saw the local paper on the counter. The headline wasn't about their wedding. It was about controversy at the courthouse, with a grainy photo of them on the steps, Sarah's hand in hers. The article quoted Mrs. Callahan, "Maplewood's values are under attack." Ellie's stomach churned. "They didn't even spell your name right," she muttered, tossing the paper aside. Sarah looked up, her eyes calm but tired. "Let it go, Ellie. They'll always find something to say." But Ellie couldn't let it go. She'd spent her life in Maplewood, sanding down its rough edges, building homes for people who now looked at her like a stranger. She grabbed her keys. "I'm going to the shop," she said, needing the familiar hum of her tools to drown out the noise. Her carpentry shop, a small shed behind their rented house, was her sanctuary. The air smelled of sawdust and varnish, and the workbench was littered with half-finished projects, a bookshelf for Sarah, a crib for Jake's newborn niece. Ellie picked up a chisel, but her hands shook. She kept seeing Tom's smirk, hearing the word funeral. She slammed the chisel down, splintering a piece of oak. Sarah found her an hour later, sitting on the floor, sawdust in her hair. "You okay?" Sarah asked, kneeling beside her. "No," Ellie admitted. "I thought I could handle this. I've dealt with crap my whole life. But it's different. It's us." Sarah took her hand, her ring glinting. "It's always been us against the world, Ellie. That's not new." Ellie laughed, a bitter sound. "Yeah, but the world's fighting dirty now." She told Sarah about the rocks, the teenagers, the way even Jake's smile had faltered last night. "I don't know how to keep doing this. What if they never accept us?" Sarah was quiet for a moment, her thumb tracing circles on Ellie's palm. "Then we make our own world. Right here. You, me, this shed, our shitty little house. They don't get to decide what our life looks like." Ellie wanted to believe her, but the town's rejection stung deeper than she'd expected. Over the next week, it got worse. Someone spray-painted "Sin" on their mailbox. A regular client canceled a furniture order, mumbling excuses. At the grocery store, Ellie overheard two women whispering about those girls and how they were ruining the town. She gripped her cart so hard her knuckles turned white. Sarah, though, seemed unbreakable. She went to work at the library, planned book clubs, and even started a queer reading group, despite the library board's hesitation. "If they're gonna stare, let's give them something to look at," she told Ellie with a grin. Her defiance was a lifeline, but Ellie couldn't shake the fear that Sarah's fire would burn out under Maplewood's weight. One evening, Ellie came home to find Sarah on the phone, her face pale. "That was my mom," Sarah said, hanging up. "She's coming to visit. Next week." Ellie froze. Sarah's mom, Diane, lived in Richmond and hadn't spoken to Sarah since she came out 3 years ago. "What does she want?" Ellie asked, wary. Sarah shrugged, but her eyes were distant. "She said she wants to understand. Whatever that means." The visit loomed over them like a storm cloud. Ellie tried to focus on work, but her projects suffered. Her cuts were uneven, her measurements off. Sarah, meanwhile, threw herself into preparing, cleaning the house, cooking meals she hoped might soften her mother's edges. "Maybe she's changed," Sarah said one night, chopping vegetables with a ferocity that betrayed her nerves. Ellie didn't believe it, but she nodded. "Maybe." When Diane arrived, she was all sharp angles, gray hair pulled tight, lips pressed thinner than Ellie remembered. She hugged Sarah stiffly, barely glanced at Ellie. Dinner was tense, the clink of silverware louder than their words. Diane asked about Sarah's job, the weather, anything but the wedding. Finally, Sarah broke the silence. "Mom, we're married. You didn't even ask about it." Diane set down her fork. "I don't know what you want me to say, Sarah. It's not what I pictured for you." Ellie's hands curled into fists under the table. She wanted to defend Sarah, to tell Diane to leave, but Sarah's pleading look stopped her. "I'm happy, Mom," Sarah said, her voice breaking. "Can't that be enough?" Diane's eyes softened, just for a moment, but she didn't answer. The rest of the visit was a dance of avoidance, with Diane leaving early the next morning. Sarah didn't cry, but Ellie saw the weight settle in her shoulders, heavier than before. That night, Ellie found Sarah in the backyard, staring at the stars. "I thought she'd at least try," Sarah whispered. Ellie pulled her close, feeling the tremor in her wife's body. For the first time, Ellie realized Sarah wasn't unbreakable, she was just better at hiding the cracks. The weeks after Diane's visit were a blur of routine and resistance. Ellie threw herself into her work, taking on extra projects to avoid the town's gossip. Sarah kept up her library programs, but her smile was thinner, her jokes less frequent. Maplewood wasn't letting up. The local church started a traditional family campaign, with flyers plastered on every lamppost. Ellie tore them down when she could, but they kept reappearing, like weeds. One morning, Ellie found a note slipped under their door, and signed, scrawled in block letters, "Leave or pay." She showed it to Sarah, who read it, jaw tight, and tossed it in the trash. "They're just trying to scare us," Sarah said, but her voice wavered. Ellie wasn't so sure. That night, she installed a security camera outside their house, her hands shaking as she wired it. She hadn't told Sarah about the whispers she'd overheard at the hardware store, rumors of a town meeting to address the issue. The issue, Ellie knew, was them. The breaking point came at the annual Maplewood Harvest Festival. Ellie and Sarah had always loved its hayrides, the apple cider, the way the town square glowed under fairy lights. This year, they hesitated, but Jake convinced them to go. "You belong here," he said, clapping Ellie on the shoulder. "Don't let them win." The festival was packed, families laughing, kids chasing balloons. Ellie and Sarah walked hand in hand, ignoring the stares. For a moment, felt normal until they reached the main stage, where a local pastor was speaking. His voice boomed through the speakers, preaching about God's design and protecting our values. The crowd cheered, and Ellie felt Sarah's hand tighten in hers. "Let's go," Ellie whispered, but Sarah shook her head, her eyes fixed on the stage. "No. I'm done running." Before Ellie could stop her, Sarah climbed onto the stage, snatching the microphone from the stunned pastor. "My name is Sarah Harper," she said, her voice steady despite the gasps from the crowd. "I'm married to Ellie Harper. We're not your issue. We're your neighbors. We're people. And we're not going anywhere." The crowd went silent, then erupted. Some cheered, others booed. Ellie's heart raced as she pushed through to the stage, ready to pull Sarah away. But Sarah stood her ground, her eyes blazing. Jake appeared beside Ellie, his presence a shield. "She's got this," he murmured. The pastor tried to take back the mic, but Sarah held firm. "You don't get to decide who belongs here," she said. "Love does. And I love my wife." Ellie's chest ached with pride and fear as she climbed onto the stage, taking Sarah's hand. The boos grew louder, but so did the cheers. A few faces, younger ones, mostly clapped, their eyes bright with something like hope. The pastor stormed off, and the festival organizers cut the mic. But Sarah's words hung in the air. They left the stage to a mix of applause and jeers, Jake trailing behind like a bodyguard. Back home, Sarah collapsed onto the couch, her bravado gone. "Was that stupid?" she asked. her voice small. "No," Ellie said, sitting beside her. "It was brave. You're brave." She kissed Sarah's forehead, feeling the weight of her own words. She'd always thought Sarah was the strong one, but now she saw the cost of that strength. The next day, the local paper ran a story about Sarah's speech, calling it divisive. But something shifted. A few neighbors stopped by with casseroles, awkward but kind. A teenager from the festival, a girl named Mia, showed up at the library to join Sarah's reading group. "I didn't know we could be like you," Mia said, her voice shy. Sarah hugged her, and Ellie saw a spark return to her wife's eyes. But the threats didn't stop. Another note appeared, this time with a broken bottle on their porch. Ellie called the sheriff, but he brushed it off as kids being kids. Frustrated, Ellie started asking around, determined to find out who was behind it. She talked to Jake, to her clients, even to Mrs. Callahan, who avoided her eyes and muttered about town standards. One night, Ellie spotted Tom at the bar, laughing with a group of men. She confronted him, her voice low but sharp. "You throwing rocks, Tom. Leaving notes." He sneered, beer in hand. "You're the ones stirring up trouble. Don't blame me if the town fights back." Ellie walked away before she did something she'd regret, but Tom's words stuck with her. The town was fighting back not just against them, but against change itself. And Ellie wasn't sure how much longer they could hold on. Winter came early to Maplewood, the air sharp with frost and unspoken tension. Ellie and Sarah tried to settle into married life, but the threats grew bolder. A brick shattered their living room window one night, glass scattering across the floor. The note tied to it read, "Last warning." Ellie called the sheriff again, but he took one look at the note and shrugged. "No fingerprints. No proof," he said, as if that settled it. Sarah was quieter now, her fire dimmed. She still ran her library programs, but Ellie noticed the way her hands trembled when she thought no one was watching. Ellie felt helpless, her anger a useless weight. She started staying up late, watching the security camera feed, her tools forgotten in the shop. Jake came by one morning with coffee and a plan. "You need allies," he said. "Not everyone in this town's against you. Let's find them." He dragged Ellie and Sarah to a community center meeting, a neutral space where a few residents were organizing a unity event. Ellie was skeptical, but Sarah agreed, desperate for a lifeline. The meeting was small, maybe a dozen people, including Mia, the teenager from the festival. A woman named Clara, a retired teacher in her 60s, spoke up first. "I've lived here my whole life," she said, her voice steady. "And I'm tired of seeing good people run out of town for being themselves. You two deserve better." Ellie's throat tightened. She hadn't expected support. Not like this. Others chimed in, a young couple, a single dad, even a pastor from a neighboring town who'd heard about Sarah's speech. They planned a rally, not for politics but for community, to show Maplewood could be more than its worst voices. The rally was set for a Saturday in December, in the town square. Ellie and Sarah spent the week preparing, printing flyers, baking cookies, trying to believe this could work. But the night before, their car tires were slashed. Ellie found another note under the wiper. "You won't win." She showed it to Sarah, expecting her to crumble, but Sarah's jaw set. They're scared, she said. That means we're getting somewhere. Ellie marveled at her wife's resilience, even as she saw the exhaustion in her eyes. The rally drew a bigger crowd than they'd hoped, maybe 100 people, bundled in coats against the cold. Clara spoke first, her voice carrying over the square. This town's got a heart, she said. Let's show it. Mia read a poem she'd written about acceptance, her voice shaking but clear. When Sarah took the mic, Ellie held her breath. I love this town, Sarah said, her voice raw. But it's breaking my heart. We're not asking for approval. We're asking for a home. She reached for Ellie's hand, and the crowd's murmurs softened. Some clapped, others stood silent, but no one threw rocks. Then Tom appeared, pushing through the crowd with a few of his buddies. This is a disgrace, he shouted, his face red. You're tearing this town apart. The air tensed, and Ellie stepped forward, ready to confront him, but Clara beat her to it. Tom, you've lived here long enough to know better, Clara said, her voice sharp. If you can't love your neighbors, at least let them live. The crowd murmured agreement, and Tom's friends backed off, embarrassed. He stood there, fuming, then stormed away. The rally ended with hot cider and music, a fragile moment of peace. Ellie and Sarah stayed late, helping clean up, their hands brushing as they stacked chairs. This felt good, Ellie said, almost surprised. It's a start, Sarah replied, her smile cautious but real. But the victory was short-lived. 2 nights later, Ellie woke to the smell of smoke. She bolted outside, Sarah behind her, and found their shed-her carpentry shop engulfed in flames. The fire department arrived too late. The shed was gone, along with Ellie's tools, her projects, her sanctuary. The sheriff called it an accident, but Ellie saw the gas can in the yard, the same kind Tom kept in his truck. Sarah held her as they watched the ashes settle, her voice a whisper. We can rebuild. Ellie nodded, but inside, she wasn't sure. The town was fighting harder than ever, and she didn't know how much fight they had left. The fire changed everything. Ellie couldn't look at the charred remains of her shop without feeling her chest cave in. Sarah tried to keep them moving forward, talking about insurance, rebuilding, but Ellie saw the strain in her eyes. They were both tired, worn down by a town that refused to bend. But giving up wasn't in their blood. Jake rallied their allies, and Clara organized a fundraiser to replace Ellie's tools. The community center filled with people, some familiar, some new. Mia's parents showed up, their faces nervous but kind. Even Mrs. Callahan sent a check, with a note that read, I was wrong. I'm sorry. Ellie stared at the note, unsure whether to laugh or cry. The fundraiser raised enough for a new set of tools. But more than that, it showed Ellie and Sarah they weren't alone. The rally had planted a seed, and now roots were spreading. The local paper ran a story about the fire, calling it arson, and for the first time, the sheriff promised to investigate. Ellie didn't trust him, but it was something. One evening, Sarah pulled Ellie into the backyard, where they'd sat after Diane's visit. She'd strung up new lights, their glow soft against the winter dark. We're not done, Sarah said, her voice fierce. This town doesn't get to break us. Ellie looked at her, the woman who'd become her home, and felt a spark reignite. You're right, she said. Let's fight. They started small rebuilding the shed with Jake's help, hosting a new reading group at the library, inviting Mia and her friends. Sarah wrote an open letter to the town, published in the paper, about love, resilience, and the right to belong. It didn't change everyone's minds, but it reached enough. People started waving when they passed Ellie's truck. A few clients returned, apologetic. The threats slowed, then stopped. The real turning point came in spring. The sheriff arrested Tom, linking him to the gas can and the notes. He denied it, but the evidence was enough for a trial. At the hearing, Ellie and Sarah sat in the front row, holding hands. Tom's lawyer called their marriage a provocation, but the Judge Marilyn, who'd married them, shut him down. This is about crime, not love, she said. Tom was convicted, sentenced to community service and a fine. It wasn't enough, but it was justice. The day after the trial, Ellie and Sarah walked through the town square, hand in hand. The church bell rang, but this time, it didn't feel like a war cry. It felt like a heartbeat. They passed the oak tree where they'd had their first date, where they'd sat after their wedding. Sarah stopped, pulling Ellie close. We did it, she whispered. We made a home. Ellie kissed her, slow and sure, under the spring sun. The town wasn't perfect, whispers lingered, and some faces would never soften. But they'd carved out a space, built on love and stubborn hope. They were the first, but they wouldn't be the last. Mia joined their reading group, out and proud. A young couple down the street came out, inspired by their story. Maplewood was changing, one heart at a time. As they walked home, Ellie thought about the word funeral. It had stung, but it was wrong. Their love wasn't a death, it was a beginning. They'd fought for it, bled for it, and now they were living it. And in Maplewood, where history was written in small moments, that was everything.